Today kicked off a very special fundraiser for a local radio station in Corpus Christi. Today was the first day of KLUX's annual on-air fundraiser. The 5-day event raises money for the local non-commercial station where local volunteers and other organizations take phone calls and pledges from listeners. The radio station has been around for more than 30 years and strives to serve the local community.
We air over 40,000 public service announcements a year, and the dedication in the time of civil emergency, we are there for the community.
Wynn says that they hope to raise $65,000 for their radio station. If you'd like more information about the station and where you can donate, visit our website, KIITV.com.